fact that inflation is still not durably at the Fed's target. And it's not just that it's not there, it's that the Fed, at least right now, doesn't see a clear and convincing path to it so that they can start to ease off the tight monetary policy that they have in place. And so I think one of the things, what we've seen, obviously, over the course of the last 6 months is a recognition that we're going to need higher rates first in order to slow the economy, in order to kick off that moderating cycle to slow wage growth, which should eventually slow nominal spending and then slow inflation. But that rise in interest rates essentially hasn't been yet enough to get there in a convincing manner. And I think one of the issues was that the Fed basically said, as of a couple of meetings ago, they were really pointing to the fact that the short rate, or recognizing the short rate, really wasn't the thing that was going to get the job done. They really needed that long end to move up. And they got some of that until, of course, Janet Yellen wrestled away the tightening that they needed through the shift in the QRA composition, bringing bond yields down.
Yeah, we don't have a team, right? I mean, they wrestle each other all the time.
Of course. And what I would emphasize is, from a roles perspective, if you actually go back and read about fiscal monetary policy in the 60s or in the 70s, this is not unusual, I would say, particularly in heightened inflationary environments, or in environments where there's, a desire to engage in fiscal expansion and populism, as well as, global conflict, to fund global conflict. And so it's not like this is a shocking move on the Treasury's part, but I do think it's an important move because it basically the Treasury has been a technocratic institution basically for the last 30 years. And now what we're seeing is indications that it's going to be a policy-making institution rather than a technocratic implementation institution. That's a big shift. And you'd be surprised at how much flexibility Janet Yellen has actually to shift the composition of duration before running into any meaningful sort of outliers in terms of the overall debt composition in the U.S.
Right. And I think we're all old enough to remember when Janet Yellen was the Fed chair and she was banging on the table saying, hey, we're doing all this monetary policy stuff, but there's no fiscal, right? So now that she's in, leading the Treasury, she's doing all this fiscal, but it's offsetting the monetary policy stuff. So, just not everyone they're just not on the same page at all.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that was super interesting about the market action coming out of QRA was that there's basically a bid on all bonds, right? But what that ended up doing is it created a bid on 2s and 10s, and that didn't make any sense. Because if these two levers are going to work in opposition to each other, which I think, I'd say probably over the next year, we're going to see opposition between them. What that should indicate is that the Fed needs to be tighter than expected before the QRA. And given that the Treasury is going to be essentially easier than expected before the QRA. But instead, the exact opposite happened in the market action, which was Powell got priced in to ease more in 24 as a function of the QRA. And that's the thing that I think makes no sense, to be honest with you. If we're in this new world, Powell's going to have to do more in response to the easier long end policy. And so those, 75 to 100 basis point cuts that are priced into 24 certainly look vulnerable in that context.